Okay, I see we already have quite some people, so let's just get started as we have a full agenda today. Yeah, welcome everyone. Good afternoon for me, maybe good morning or good evening for others, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining today's webinar that is co-hosted by GOGLA and IOM Mozambique. Today we will take a look at the imperative for consumer protection in energy access projects in displacement and humanitarian context. Maybe before I dive into the logistics, let me introduce myself so that you know who you're looking at today. My name is Puk van Basten. I'm in the performance and investment team at GOGLA, and I'm based in the Netherlands. Yeah. Let's move on to some logistics first. We will record the session today and share the recording as well as the slides afterwards with all the registrants. So don't worry. Throughout the webinar, there will be time to ask questions, but please do feel free to share them in the chat as well if you have any questions coming up throughout the webinar. And lastly, of course, we hope you find it useful today and enjoy listening into the webinar. Yeah, on the agenda, firstly, I will tell you a bit about consumer protection and the off-grid solar industry, why we think this is important. Then we will hear from Isaac Mwangi from IOM Mozambique, and he will share some of the insights from a study into consumer protection they have done in their resettlement sites in Mozambique. And afterwards, we will have a panel discussion where we will try to find an answer, or at least discuss the question on how we can better protect OGS consumers in displaced settings. But before we get into the weeds of all these agenda items, I would like to give the floor to Leslie Sly, who is joining us from GPA today, to give some opening remarks. So please, Leslie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Puck. And I will go ahead and share my screen here with a few slides just to kick us off. And I hope that is coming through clearly for everyone. So hello, I am Leslie Sly. I'm happy to be here today representing GPA. I work as a desk officer supporting the transition of diesel generators in humanitarian response. And I imagine many of you are familiar with the GPA, but for those of you who are not, the GPA functions foremost as a coordinator among the many organizations doing work in this space. So we aim to facilitate information sharing and alignment across agencies to address inefficiencies and really galvanize action at scale. So in a world where we have finite financial resources and technical capacity, allowing inefficiencies to persist in our sector limits our ability to bring energy to vulnerable people in really real ways. So inefficiencies mean fewer women and girls have access to clean cooking sources that will help them live longer, healthier lives and save them from time-consuming and sometimes dangerous trips to collect firewood. Inefficiencies also mean fewer refugees and IDPs whose lives have been turned upside down by conflict and disaster have access to electrified health facilities and schools, or benefit from the safety, comfort, and dignity that comes with lighting and charging access in their streets and homes. The number of displaced people around the world is really a growing crisis, and forced migration will continue to increase in the coming years due to the intensifying impacts of climate change and ongoing armed conflicts. In the context of energy access, in this conversation around energy consumption specifically, it is safe to assume that displaced people will find it harder to access consumer protection rights, both because of their circumstances and legal status, and also taking into account realities such as fewer suppliers and camps where consumers can return faulty products or receive regular maintenance. So looking at kind of the structure of the GPA and what we do, the GPA functions as a coordinator for all the organizations doing work in this space, as I had mentioned. And our work really strives to move away from the piecemeal approaches and bring real impact in the form of clean energy access to people in displacement settings. So we're really focused on laying the groundwork in our programming as well to bring private sector involvement to countries with poor energy infrastructure and substantial populations of displaced people. And consumer protection is certainly a necessary component of that. The GPA is very happy to support these kinds of initiatives, and as we aim to fulfill our role as a coordinating body, and we're very happy to share IOM Mozambique's findings with other organizations working alongside us in displacement contexts. So without further ado, I will turn it over to GOGLA and IOM.
Thank you, Leslie. I got some signs in the chat that people were not able to see the slide, but yeah, we will start them afterwards. So,
oh, I'm so sorry. I should have. I wish you'd interrupted me. It's okay though. I hope the point came across.
Good, I guess. So people won't see the slides afterwards, but thanks so much for sharing that with us. Yeah, before I will pick this back up. Yeah, before we move on, and I will share a bit more on what we at GOGLA do on consumer protection. I would like to do a little bit of a temperature check in the virtual group that we have to see whether some of you are already aware of the GOGLA Consumer Protection Code that we have. So let me launch this poll. I hope you're all able to see it. And please indicate whether you are already aware of the code that we have. Maybe you have heard of it already, or maybe even the company or organization that you work for has made a commitment to it or an endorsement of the code. Or maybe you have no idea what the code entails or the ins and outs of it. So just, there of course are no wrong or right answers. We're just curious to see how far this has come across. So I see a bunch of answers coming in already. That's good. Okay. Give it a few more seconds to see if anyone wants to respond. So, looking at the results, well, almost half of it has at least heard of the code. That's good to see. And then there's an almost, well, even distinction between companies that already have made a commitment and some that have, some people that are not very much aware of the code. For the ones that are not aware, we'll share some details. For the other ones, also stay tuned for all the information. Yeah, I will share a bit more on what we do at GOGLA, as I said. So, yeah, first of all, to start, why consumer protection? Why we think this is important. Well, of course, we're really happy to see that off-grid solar products are having many positive impacts on consumers across the globe, of course, especially in developing countries. But it also brings across some financial product services risks, especially with the rise of pay-go. So the pay-as-you-go methodology that many off-grid solar companies use these days. So that's why since 2018, GOGLA and some of the leading companies in the industry came together and recognized these risks and decided to develop the Consumer Protection Code. And really with the aim to ensure that next to focusing on profitability and growth, that these objectives are fully aligned with the protection of the consumers that we are trying to serve, and that we have responsible practices in place. So then in 2018, the Consumer Protection Code was brought to life, developed by the industry and to be used as well for the industry. And it defines the minimum standards of practice that off-grid solar customers can expect from their energy service provider. The code consists of a set of principles with a total combined indicators total of 37, and a self-assessment tool that companies can use to measure, to monitor, and to report to, for example, their investors or other stakeholders. And here you can see what the code looks like. So as I said, there are 6 principles that try to include and cover the wide array of challenges and risks that we have seen in the sector. So first of all, there's transparency, mainly about how off-grid solar companies communicate with their consumers. Responsible sales and pricing, to make sure that consumers are able to access products that fit their needs and their ability to pay. Good consumer service and good product quality, I think, are somewhat more straightforward. The protection of personal data and fair and respectful treatment of consumers. And the code, together with its principles, the indicators, and the self-assessment tool, as I said, are defined by the GOGLA Consumer Protection Working Group, so a gathering of member companies, and we maintain it as well to make sure that it stays accurate, adequate, and representative for the trends that we see in the industry. And with the code comes a framework as well, an assessment framework that mainly consists of a self-assessment, as I said. So after making a commitment, companies are required to do a self-assessment at least every year in order to maintain their commitment and to be publicly recognized on our website. But if companies they can also choose to go more in depth with their assessment and do a third-party assessment or a consumer protection survey. So those are 2 new services that we have added to the assessment framework to enable companies to dive a bit deeper into their performance against the code. And then, yeah, we are really happy to see that since the launch of the code, almost 100 commitments and endorsements have been made already to the code. So yeah, lots of companies and stakeholders in the industry have committed their alignment with the principles of the code. And we hope to see this number even increasing more in the coming years. And yeah, before I'd like to give the word to Isaac, I'd like to do one more poll question to see, after hearing a bit about the Consumer Protection Code and the principles, which of these principles you think might be the most critical in displacement humanitarian settings? So let me launch this poll. I trust you can see the poll. So yeah, we're curious to hear which of the 6 consumer protection principles you think is the most critical for energy access consumers in displacement settings. So as I said, we have transparency, mainly about the communication of off-grid solar companies to their consumers, fair, respectful treatment of the company staff to the consumers, responsible sales and pricing to avoid over-indebtedness, personal data privacy, so the protection of personal data that the company has access to. Good product quality, mainly according to the Fair standards that we have as a leading standard in the operational industry, and good customer service. So yeah, we're thinking what you think might be the most important one to take into account. I'll give it a few seconds and then share the results with you. Okay. Yeah. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So the majority thinks that responsible sales and pricing would be the most critical one in these kind of settings, followed by product quality and transparency. Okay. That's interesting to see. Thank you for filling that out. Yeah, so when we move on, I'd like to give the floor to Isaac Wangi. He's the project manager for energy access in displacement settings. And he might be able to share the most critical principle they have seen in a recent survey that they have done in 2 of their resettlement sites. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Isaac.
All right, thank you so much, Poop. And hi, everyone. My name is Isaac Mwangi. I'm the project manager for energy access and displacement settings, working with IOM Mozambique. And I'm going to present about our recent survey that we did on consumer protection in the project that we are working in. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of my presentation whereby I'm going to share about IOM key findings from the assessment that we did, our overview, and the opportunities that do exist, especially in the area of consumer protection. And then maybe later I can be able to dive into Q&A. Next slide, please. So IOM Mozambique in the last 2 years has been implementing an energy access project in displacement settings, targeting IDPs who are displaced by Cyclone Idai back in 2019. And we've been doing this to improve their energy access, to also strengthen their self-resilience, and also to do productive use of energy for income generation. And the project also was a pilot to test various energy delivery models, and which are able to inform us about upscaling and reaching more people, because we only managed to do the project in 7 resettlement sites out of 85 in the central region of Mozambique. As you can see on the map on the right, those are the 7 resettlement sites that we targeted in Sofala and Manica province. And for the project, we employed a market-based approach, whereby we had various work streams focusing on awareness raising, energy savings in the lending groups, and also we had partnership with other energy companies plus programs, and of course, productive use of energy for income generation. And for today, we're going to focus much on awareness raising and also how this builds into consumer protection. Next slide, please. So for awareness campaign, for the awareness campaign and survey, our main aim is mostly to improve the knowledge of the displaced communities when it comes to clean energy technologies. And our key messages revolve around the clean energy products, the impacts they do have in their lives, how do they acquire these specific systems, and also we focus on consumer protection. We do employ a peer-to-peer approach, whereby we do have energy ambassadors who are located within the specific resettlement sites, engaging with the communities, and also acting much on coordination between the companies and organizations that are working in this specific project. So far, we have been able to reach more than 5,000 individuals. in the 7 resettlement sites, and we hope to reach more in the coming future. Next slide, please. So in regards to consumer protection, IOM did a survey in the 7 resettlement sites in the during the implementation of the project. And why we did that is that we realized that consumer protection subject has never been done in resettlement sites. We have not found any report. So we realized it's a gap, and it's very important, especially when working with displaced communities who will still need protection, and they are to achieve durable solutions. And then also IDPs, as much as they are displaced, they are also need to be regarded as consumers of clean energy technologies. So they also need to understand their rights as consumers of clean energy products. And then also with the help of GOGLA, we leverage on their methodology to conduct this specific survey, and we did it in the 7 resettlement sites. Next slide, please. So in summary, just the key highlights from the survey is that we identified 2 types of solar home systems that are in the resettlement site. One is the other one, the high quality solar home systems, mostly under pay-as-you-go scheme and fronted by off-grid solar companies. And then they're sold under the pay-as-you-go and also cash and off-the-shelf systems. This is for off-the-shelf is whereby the consumers just go buy a panel, a battery, and they assemble themselves, compared to what is offered by the solar companies, whereby they do provide the whole unit already sized, and they have already provided the technical review to that. And then also for the solar home systems under the pay-as-you-go system provided by the solar companies, they do range from a 10-watt system, which has the capability to charge a phone and provide 2 lightings, to the high capacity of around 50 watts, which has the capacity to charge a phone, provide lighting for several points, and also even watch TV. And then for our survey, we were able to have the respondents, 91% of our respondents had bought the solar home systems from the off-grid solar companies, and the 9% is mostly from off-the-shelf systems where they do self-assembling. Next slide, please. So I'm going to present on our key findings from the survey that we did, and I'm not going to focus much on the 6 codes that Cook has shown. I'm going to only target 3, which we felt are the most important when it comes to working with displaced communities. And number 1 was on transparency. And with this code, we do expect the companies to provide and share sufficient information on solar products, the services, the payment terms and conditions, and also about data. And from the survey, we were able to find that 96% of the respondents felt that they were well informed about the types of solar home systems on sale, and the payment terms, so only 4% felt they were not. And in relation to the contract terms and conditions, 93% felt they were well informed, while 7% were not. And the same can be said about the contract duration, whereby 92% of the respondents knew about their duration for the contract that they signed with the solar companies. 6 could not remember and 2 didn't. So this is an indication of good practice, especially to these specific companies that are working in these specific settings. Next slide, please. Continuing with the transparency, the other thing that came about is on the transaction language, because, we work mostly the off-grid solar companies work in rural areas whereby the levels of education are very low. So communication is very key, and especially when passing technical information to the people. So from our survey, we were able to find out that 62% of the respondents found that the language and the communication material shared Sorry for that. We were able to realize that 62% found that the language and the communication materials were understandable. 30% somewhat clear, and 8% did not feel fully satisfied with the language and the complexity of the communication material. And then in understanding the payment terms and conditions, this is whereby they are signing the contracts and they have to understand the terms and contracts and also their payment, how they're going to be paying, how much they're going to be paying for their monthly installment, what are the penalties and the days or something like that. So 49% were not adequately informed. This is especially by the sales agents recruited by the solar companies working in these specific settings, about the future changes in prices and even the consequences of non-payment. 47% found out, yes, they were informed, and 4% do not remember being informed. So this is very, very important, and I'm going to come back later, especially on the transactional language and the payment terms and conditions. I will go to the next code. Next slide, please. This is very, very important. And actually from the survey, we have seen that majority have voted for responsible sales and pricing, because affordability is an issue, especially in these specific settings. As I said earlier, they're yet to achieve durable solutions and they're in the process of recovery. So we would expect the companies to ensure that they do their assessment and assess the affordability of the products by their potential consumers and without being overburdened. So from our survey, we were able to find out that 50% of the households reported that the monthly payments had an influence on their monthly budget. This is very significant. And out of the 50%, 15% of the households reported that the monthly payment was considered as a heavy burden. Especially even, which, as they said earlier, they had an influence on their monthly budget. That's very, very significant. 44% somewhat, and 42% did not consider it as a burden. So it's very, very important to look into the affordability and the income levels of the displaced or your potential consumers to be able to provide the right pricing for your products. And then on the ability to pay, as I said, it's a way to be able to reduce the impact of the, on the monthly budgets, so that 65% of these specific households reported that they were not assessed on the ability to pay, and they just signed the contracts and all that, and 28% reported being assessed and 7% were not. So this is very, very important, especially when assessing the affordability, to also not overburden the displaced communities. As I said, there is still need of protection, and it's a point that you need to emphasize. Next slide, please. So the other code is on good consumer service. This is where we expect that the solar companies that are working in these specific settings to be able to provide top-notch service and not consider displaced communities not viable customers. And with this, we'd expect that they do provide after-sales services, warranty, and even about waste management when the solar systems lifetime are over. So from our survey, we realized that 90% of the households reported receiving a warranty on their products they purchased. 5% reported not, and 5% do not know. On the issue of after-sale services or solving issues, during our survey, out of the 23 respondents that experienced some challenges with their products, 9 had open issues at the time of the assessment, with 5 solved within less than 10 days, and had stayed for more than 10 days, less than 10 days, I mean, and 4 with unresolved issues for up to 30 days. And this is very, very critical, and especially when you're working with a closed community, especially like in the resettlement sites, whereby information do spread out very quickly. So it's very, very important for the solar companies to solve these specific issues so that it doesn't hinder the people who have not adopted the systems not to acquire the specific systems. And on the e-waste management, this is where it's very critical. We realized that we found out that 93% of our respondents of the household that we surveyed, we were not provided with any information about how they're going to dispose their solar home systems when the lifetime comes to an end. And actually even and only 6% were informed on how to dispose this. So this is very, very important, especially whereby we are promoting environmental sustainability in displacement settings. And it's an area that not only the solar companies need to work on, plus also the project promoters such as IOM to be able to have a good environment, protect the environment from e-waste. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key highlights or the key opportunities that we see that exist in the resettlement sites or in displacement settings when it comes to consumer protection, we do see that humanitarian actors working on energy access need to be sensitized about consumer protection codes and also ensure that the companies they'll be working with have a commitment to the consumer protection codes. This is a call to everyone from all the stakeholders. That's the only way we can be able to promote this specific cause. And then also, majority of the awareness campaigns that we do conduct in energy access focus much on the technology and impact it has on the communities or the consumers. It's also good to include education on consumer protection so that the consumers understand their rights as consumers of these specific products and what they should expect, especially when working with private sector companies. So this is just to not only increase the knowledge on the clean energy products, but also as their rights on their rights as consumers of clean energy products. And then number 3 is that majority of the solar company use sales agents. Sales agents are deployed, let's say like in displacement settings to go and talk to the consumers and sell the product. And they do act as a bridge between the solar companies and the consumers. So having well-trained agents is very, very important because they can be able to make or break a project or even have negative image maybe on the company or even affect the adoption of the solar home systems or clean energy products. And then on the other part is on the solar companies need to be transparent on the information they do provide, especially when it comes to pricing, the payment plans, the condition for warranties and after-sale services. And this is very, very important, especially in displacement settings whereby you're working with very vulnerable communities and information is very key. And also in these specific settings, they're very kind of closed and communication and information do spread very quickly. So it's very, very important to pass this information and actually even use the channels that do exist or the governance structures that do exist in these specific settings. And then the other part is on the language. As I said, working in the rural areas where the education levels are very low, so you find that majority of the people only speak the local language. So it's very important. Majority of the brochures we see are mostly in English, or let's say like in Mozambique, they're in Portuguese. It's also good to translate to the local language so that people can be able to understand the products that they're buying, also understand the terms and conditions of the contracts that they're going to sign. And then last but not least is on sensitization of the solar companies on the consumer protection codes. And this is more so working with the displacement set. They're dealing with consumer who still have protection needs. So very, very important, and especially for institutions such as IOM, who are promoting energy access in displacement settings, to have a sitting these specific companies to be able to understand the consumer or their potential consumers, because they're still under recovery. They're recovering from disaster. They're recovering from displacement as well. And as we move with them through the journey of recovery, it's very, very important and for the companies to understand and walk the journey with the displaced communities. Thank you. Over to you, Puk.
Yes, thank you, Isaac. Very interesting to hear. Yeah, I'd like to give a moment to the audience to see if there are any questions to Isaac. If I'm correct, I didn't see anything coming in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to still share any questions you have there, and we can come back to it later. Yes, then I'd like to move on to our third agenda item, that is the panel discussion of today. And I'd like to introduce you to this fantastic panel that we have here. First of all, we have Luca Giacopelli from ENGIE Energy Access, who ENGIE is a off-grid solar company, and it might be good to notice that they have been very much involved in the Consumer Protection Initiative and the development of the code. And they also are working very hard to uphold the standards that we have in place across their operations and also in Mozambique. Well, the second one on our panel is Isaac, that we have just heard from, representing IOM Mozambique, and Rebecca Rhodes, my colleague at GOGLA, the Senior Project Manager for Consumer Protection. These three panelists will dive into the question on how we can better protect off-grid solar consumers in displacement settings today. And to start us off, I would like to address to Luca and ask him if you could share a bit more on what it is that you do at ENGIE Energy Access, as you are one of the leading companies in the Consumer Protection Initiative, and why you think this is so important for the industry.
Yeah. Pleasure. So thanks a lot, Puk. Thanks for the invitation, and really pleasure to be here this afternoon together with all of you, representing ENGIE Energy Access. Just a couple of words again on who we are. ENGIE Energy Access is part of the ENGIE Group. It actually came about in its current form in 2020 through basically the acquisition, subsequent acquisition and merging of three separate entities that were actually working in the solar off-grid space in the African market. Power Corner being and actually like serving the mini grid market. Phoenix International, that you might remember, based in Uganda and still working in the solar home system market, as well as Mobisol. In 2020, ENGIE completed the acquisition, or 19 completed the acquisition of the last entity, Mobisol, and then merged the three into ENGIE Energy Access. We have up to now impacted 7.5 million lives in Africa. We're currently active in 9 markets. And our actually target is to impact 20 million lives through the provision of affordable, clean, and reliable sources of energy, renewable energy, by 2025. So this is who we are. And myself, I work in the customer finance department. I'm senior credit risk manager, and taking care of credit risk at the group level, as well as actually the point of contact for consumer protection for the group. And and in fact, I've been there on consumer protection together with GOGLA since like the early days. And this goes back actually to 2017, where when actually due to both an internal need and an external demand from from one of our donor, in fact, FMO, we actually pioneered the first, like, let's say, assessment, consumer protection assessment, using what or like codes that we borrowed from similar industry, or like in fact the microfinance industry. And you might also, some of you might be in fact familiar with the SMART campaign and the code, the consumer protection code in that actually is existing in that sector. So we started off like with this like voluntary self-assessment that then kind of like kicked off all what were the subsequent developments that came about in GOGLA, precisely trying to adapt the existing codes to our industry. And in fact, in 2020, already we were one of the first company committing to actually the code. That then implied the first, in fact, self-assessment that happened towards the end of 21. And again, we started like in 2022 as, in fact, the commitment prescribe our second self-assessment. What's also important to mention is that the self-assessment is always like a moment of realization that actually comes, or it's shared within the company, accompanied by an action plan that tries really to actually address these the deficiencies that actually we find in the assessment process. And yes, like and try to actually streamline, especially at the management level, what are in fact, what is the code and what does this imply, and again, like what are the benefits that are coming together with the implementation of the code. So this is a little bit like our background and our commitment towards the code.
Thanks you, Luca. Yeah, I actually have a direct follow-up question based on what you have just shared. Maybe more generally speaking, what are some of the major challenges that you have encountered at ENGIE Energy Access when it comes to consumer protection?
Yeah, I think in different phases, the challenges have been different. In fact, like as said, the very beginning of this journey was really trying to find like standards to compare us with, and try to actually have a sort of like understanding of where we were as a company when we wanted to, in fact, ensure customer protection. That was, in fact, what was the main challenge at the beginning. Of course, like with the adoption, the creation and adoption of the GOGLA consumer protection code, this is much easier. And when we now go, I think, to really like what are the nitty-gritty, or like the biggest evidences that we have in the implementation, I think the main challenge is really to trickle the code down to the customer-facing. I hope you can still hear me. Yeah.
Yes.
I have to move. I'm sorry. To trickle down the code to the customer-facing personnel, which most of the time are in fact non-full-time employees or contractors, and that also then creates a difficulty in ensuring this consistency in terms of like having a full understanding and then transmission and implementation of the code of conduct when in fact dealing directly with the customers. So that is definitely one of the most challenging aspect of it.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Luca. Yeah, maybe moving on to Rebecca, who will have a more of a broader perspective as being part of the industry association that we are at GOGLA. Yeah, what do you think is mainly driving the uptake of the Consumer Protection Code across the industry, and yeah, why do you think it's so important?
Yeah. Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, first of all, I just want to say kind of a big thank you to Isaac and his colleagues at IOM for kind of taking up this initiative and really aligning, you know, the work that they're doing with the Consumer Protection Code. And it's this kind of additional uptake that we really want to see and is going to help, you know, drive the wider uptake and adoption of the code. So yeah, as Luca said, you know, we've been working on this for a few years now as an industry, and first by supporting, you know, the development of code. And then we saw that consumer protection, you know, was quite central to industry discussions when COVID hit, for example, and companies were figuring out how to respond to the crisis. It kind of, you know, raised that awareness and made consumer protection kind of central to how the industry responded. And it's again, as we sit in 2023, it's really come into the fore as we kind of look ahead to building an industry that's sustainable and that's going to help us reach those 700 million plus people who still don't have access to electricity. And when we look at the pay-as-you-go model, the consumer protection is, you know, a key to success in this business model. So as long as consumers are aware of their rights, you know, they just are not going to pay if a product is substandard or they're not happy with the service they're getting from the company. So, you know, in the longer term, it's actually really important for companies to adopt the principles and to build a consumer-centric business in the pay-as-you-go industry. And after a few years sort of down the line of working on this initiative, GOGLA is now able to kind of triangulate data from a few different points across the industry and really have a vision that shows that actually companies that are doing consumer protection well are the ones that are more likely to be profitable and have better repayment rates from their companies. So the value of doing this well is there and really kind of driving the adoption so that we can finally, you know, demonstrate the benefit of it to companies, to investors, and to consumers as well. So yeah, so I think from GOGLA's perspective, as we continue to grow the Consumer Protection Code, we also need to make sure that it's responsive to kind of emerging risks and new areas. So for instance, I think looking at the displacement settings and humanitarian sector, what risks may be heightened or unique? How can the code, you know, suit the companies that are working in those areas as well? And we're also working on, and I've seen a question about this, the gender lens with the Consumer Protection Code as well. So looking at applying a gender lens across the principles and indicators as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, maybe going back a bit to the heightened risk that you mentioned that might be there in displacement setting, but then moving to Luca again. Yeah, how is ENGIE trying to serve this population, and how are you ensuring that the same minimum standards are met while these heightened risks may exist? Could you share a bit about what you are doing at ENGIE?
Yeah. So yeah, at ENGIE we have quite a bit of history in trying to serve in this population, not only in fact in Mozambique, where we actually work in different resettlement resettlement camps, together with IOM, but also like in other countries, in Tanzania, in Uganda, and recently also in Kenya, with the support, in fact, of again the Dutch government. How are we trying to actually serving this population? So one of Isaac's point is definitely and was definitely on products affordability. And we find that this is something extremely important, especially in that context. We have adopted different strategies there to ensure, in fact, a good or an adapted affordability or pricing for that type of market. And in fact, for example, we have been using refurbished system that ensured a lower than market price while keeping actually the quality of the product at high levels. This is definitely one aspect that we try to address. Another point that I was very happy to find in the report, and at the same time in the comments and in the presentation of Isaac, is really how to approach the customer, and how to approach, meaning during the acquisition, the customer acquisition step, through in fact the sales agent. Something that in fact has been designed specifically for the Mozambique context was to in fact recognize the specificities and the specificities of this customer segment, and try to in fact put together a team of sales agents that was in fact coming from precisely the resettlement camps. So in this way, making sure that the same people are part of the community, know the weaknesses, know the strength, know the difficulties that in fact people from the camp are in fact, or the resettlements are in fact experiencing, and include those strengths and weaknesses in the sales pitch while approaching the potential customers. This goes back again to another point of Isaac, ensure in fact training. Yes, of course, we tried to actually circumvent and give at the same time a lot of awareness of the conditions that these sales agents would find in the camps by adopting or by in fact employing sales agents from those areas. But at the same time, specifically in fact on consumer protection and again on sensitization about the specific weaknesses that these agents would find, support on the training, and making sure that the training is maybe delivered by the experts, meaning the organizations that in fact are accordingly to their mission, specifically supporting in this situation. And I'm of course referring to humanitarian agencies, NGOs working in the humanitarian compartment to precisely in fact ensure that all these weaknesses and specificities that we find in those contexts are also transferred to sales agents that might in fact approach those people as being potential customer for in fact a product that respond to their immediate needs of ensuring access to energy. So for sure, these for sure are two aspects, so affordability and ensuring sales agent sensitivity towards the context that we find, or we kind of find very strongly. And then there is all again, like for example, another point that I really also like to stress is about affordability, and in fact, like making sure that in the acquisition process, from the side of the company, there is a way to assess the affordability, or like, let's say, the capacity to repay of the customer. In this context, though, I have to say it's a little bit like tricky, this standard, because like you might end up in a situation where in order to assure that we avoid over indebtedness of the customer, we're maybe not meeting a basic need where in fact the customer does not have an alternative and find him or herself in a situation of exposing to a greater danger rather than and greater dangers or difficulties that would be avoided with access to energy. And I'm thinking about, like, in fact, ensuring access to communication, lighting for security, and all of these aspects that come with the product. So that's why I think really it is crucial in that context more than in other contexts to have like third-party actors that would in fact facilitate and help caring for and cushion the higher risk that in fact like companies in the off-grid solar space would in fact face when approaching those customers. To again being able to meet and to meet the demand, which in those cases might be an emergency demand for energy, and at the same time to ensure that this doesn't badly affect the sustainability of the companies that might in fact be interested in working in those environments. I leave it at here, but there's probably much more.
Thanks, Luca. Yeah, I see we're already running out of time a bit, but there's so much to share. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, maybe moving to Isaac for a final question. According to Luca, many of the findings you've had resonated with what they see in their operations as well. I wanted to ask you if there was anything that surprised you from the project, and as well maybe in regards to what partners and humanitarian actors can do in this space. Is there anything for you in the pipeline that we can expect?
All right, thank you so much. So in terms of the surprise, especially related to consumer protection, initially when we were designing the project and actually engaging the private sector companies to work with, especially in these specific settings, we had not thought about the Consumer Protection Code, and even we did not do the assessment of the company commitment to this specific code. So during the implementation, that's when we realized that it's a very, very important area that we need to focus on, and that's when we decided to do this specific survey to see how the companies that you're working with performing in this specific settings. So to my surprise, actually, with the findings that I've already shared today, that you'll see the company that you're working with really scored high. I expected different results, but because, as I said earlier, actually, even in our conversations with the companies, it was not part of the conversation. Right? We were just focusing on other project matters, and this was not on the table for discussion, but looking at the results, can be able to showcase that the company's commitment to CP code is very, very important, and they had already done their work. Even without us having this specific conversation, they had already done their work. So it's very, very important, maybe moving forward, and especially to the humanitarian energy actors, that this is a conversation that we should be having all the time, even during project design, engaging the solar companies, and also working with companies that already have a commitment to these specific codes. Because as I said earlier, we're working with vulnerable communities and who are still in the process of recovery, and we also need to respect their rights. And also for the companies to understand the characteristics of the consumers or their potential customers in displacement settings. So that's what really surprised me on that. And I really recommend the companies, and it was a good one. So in terms of the next steps, maybe Rebecca has already shared on the chat, IOM and GOGLA, we're going to develop a learning brief, which we're going to share with the stakeholders, sharing on our best practices, on our results, and what we should recommend, especially for displacement settings, and actually we're maybe looking into how can we be able to expand the current consumer protection codes, focusing much on the displacement settings, and to see if there's some revisions or key indicators that need to be included. Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. I think that's a great call to action coming from your side on for humanitarian actors to check or encourage the companies they work with to see if they have made a commitment to the code. And great that there will be a learning paper following. Yeah, related to that, we like to invite you as well to take a look at the Consumer Protection Hub. We've shared loads of information today, but there's even more to find here on the website, as well as an introductory guide to the code that has all the ins and outs of the code, how you can make a commitment, and many more other details. As well, we are keen to hear if you see any gaps in the resources. We're always happy to follow up on anything that you might think that is missing. So do check it out. And as well, if there's any other questions, remarks, feedback, do get in touch. You can find the email addresses from ourselves and Isaac on the slides that we will share later on. Yeah, I think we're already on top of the hour, even a bit over.
Look, can I just like really on one important element that I find, like especially like looking forward for the companies, for the off-grid companies, and profiting of this audience, it would be really great if actually we would move or the all work in this space would move from actually reaction to being to preparedness, and with that I would actually encourage the audience to actually think at creating let's say readily available solution for emergency situation that could be deployed really in a very quick manner, and so to have the partnership of even maybe complementary organization, off-grid solar companies providing energy to actually, I don't know, purify water. We are trying to testing this like in the resettlement camps in Kenya, but also I can think about like organization providing health or education, all other like emergency or shelter or all other emergency services, and having products and solution available, readily available and immediately deployable when in fact emergencies happen. And with the acknowledgement that in fact energy is one of the basic needs that you would need to provide in those circumstances. So just to work in that direction with the help of the humanitarian organization and donor community, I think they are a crucial actor. But sorry to take it another 2 minutes on that, but I find it important.
That's completely fine. You're right. Thanks for adding that. I won't say much more. Only a big thanks to the speakers from today and to everyone who has joined us, has listened in. We hope to keep the conversation going and keep an eye out for any resources that will be coming your way on this important topic. So thanks to all of you and have a good day or evening ahead.
Thanks, Puk, and a great call to action from Luca and Isaac as well. So yeah. Thank you. Enjoy.
Definitely.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.